Welcome to the 2017 Annual Sustainability Summit, California Businesses Building Cleaner, Greener Communities. To begin our program, please welcome Timothy Potts, Director of the J. Paul Getty Museum.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Jim Cuno, our President and CEO, the Getty trustees, and the entire staff here of the Getty, it's my pleasure to welcome the Los Angeles Business Council to the Getty again on this, its 11th Sustainability Summit. I'm Timothy Potts, the Director of the J. Paul Getty Museum, and I want to say how pleased we are that you have again chosen to hold this event at the Getty. We are ourselves an institution that takes very seriously the issue of environmental sustainability. Like most of you who run businesses, we too are working hard to lower our costs while ensuring we have a positive impact on environmental profile. Even as an example, even given this year's rain, we continue our efforts to conserve water. Compared to just a few years ago, we're now saving 10 million gallons of water annually by having modified our cooling towers, reconfigured our bathrooms to feature low flush systems and motion detector faucets, and by reducing landscape irrigation. Here at the Getty Center, we continue to divert more than 80% of our waste from landfills through composting. And at the Getty Villa, that percentage is even higher. Our head of facilities also shares all our successes and our failures with our peer institutions, and we annually benchmark our efforts against those of other like-minded organizations in an ongoing effort to improve our operations and conservation. Here in the museum, another aspect of sustainability is, of course, ensuring that future generations will be able to share our cultural heritage just as we do today. For this reason, we work hard to conserve our collections, the paintings, sculptures, and other objects you see in our galleries, as well as works from other institutions around the globe. And like our colleagues in the facilities department, we share our knowledge on these conservation efforts with peer institutions. I certainly hope that all of you had the opportunity to visit our two sites before. Here at the Getty Center, we show a collection of old master paintings, decorative arts, manuscripts, drawings, sculpture, and photographs, while at the Getty Villa in Malibu, we showcase our collection of Greek and Roman antiquities. If your time today allows, I do encourage you to see an exhibition or two while you're here. Closing this weekend is a timely exhibition in our Center for Photographs called Breaking News. This exhibition looks at how artists have turned to newspapers, magazines, the televised news, all as sources of inspiration for their work. Much of the work is political, and all of it, I dare say, is personal and often arresting. And in our North Pavilion, you'll find a single gallery devoted to a conservation project that the Getty undertook with colleagues overseas in London and Antwerp on a 15th century panel painting by Gerard David. This is a collaborative effort that reunites the three dispersed parts of this very important early Renaissance altarpiece. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention Pacific Standard Time, LALA, and the LALA stands for Los Angeles, Latin America. This is the Getty-sponsored initiative focused on Latin American and Latino art, music, dance, and performance, which will launch this September. It will be the most comprehensive and thought-provoking collection of Latin American and Latino art ever assembled at one time and place, with more than 70 cultural institutions participating from San Diego in the south to Santa Barbara and out to Palm Springs. At the Getty, we will present 4 exhibitions as part of this program, including the only one dedicated to pre-Columbian art, and an exhibition at the contemporary end of the spectrum, exploring the history of Argentina through more than 150 years of its photography. So once again, thank you for choosing to be here at the Getty. I wish you all the best for a thoughtful and productive conference. It's now my pleasure to welcome Ivan Penn, your summit MC, to the stage. Ivan, as I'm sure many of you know, is the energy reporter for the Los Angeles Times. Before joining the Times, he spent 23 years on the East Coast, mainly in Florida, where his career in journalism flourished. Ivan won the Gerald Loeb Award for his coverage of nuclear energy while working for the Tampa Bay Times, and has been honored with the National Headliner Award, the Society of American Business Editors and Writers Awards, and a John K. Knight Fellowship at Stanford. Please join me in welcoming your MC, Ivan Penn.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Timothy. And actually, let's give a big thank you to the Getty Center for hosting the Sustainability Summit again this year. The Los Angeles Business Council and the Getty Center convene this annual Sustainability Summit, now in its 11th year, to help develop business-driven solutions and effective climate change public policy that will allow Los Angeles to realize its clean energy future. It's my pleasure to join today as your host, and when I mentioned to one of my colleagues that I was the MC for the Sustainability Summit, he said, nobody even knows what that word means. But hopefully in the course of the next 5 hours, we'll get some more clarity as to what it means today. At a time of change in national climate policy, leaders in Los Angeles and throughout California are critical players in the direction our country takes. The new administration has repealed former President Obama's Clean Power Plan and is considering withdrawing U.S. commitment to the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Businesses are now faced with the choice to continue on a path to sustainability, even if national policy does not reflect the economic benefits of investing in sustainability. But even in this context, California has continued to move toward a clean energy future, setting ambitious targets for renewable energy and greenhouse gas emissions reductions with landmark legislation, including SB 350 and SB 32. California has blazed a trail for the nation on clean energy and climate initiatives, and the country has looked to California to prove that sustainability and economic development do work hand in hand. This year's theme, California Businesses Building Cleaner, Greener Communities, focuses on the role the private sector will play in achieving our 2030 climate goals. Today, we'll hear from state and local officials, clean energy stakeholders, academics, and business and philanthropic leaders. We will hear today how California's progressive building standards will soon set a path to achieve net zero development. How California regulators plan to balance a clean energy future with an abundance of renewable energy, and why our biggest private financial institutions have made it a priority to invest in sustainability. The LABC has organized a compelling program for you all today. In a few minutes, we will hear from California's recently confirmed Attorney General, Xavier Becerra, on how California will define its historic climate initiatives, followed by a presentation from FivePoint on the first master planned community in this country designed to have a net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Then our first panel will be framed by founder and CEO of Architecture 2030, Ed Mazria, and moderated by Michael Northrop, Program Director for Sustainable Development at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. The panel will discuss what it really means to build to net zero, how buildings can achieve water independence and new technological innovations that will support this transition. Later in the morning, State Senator Pro Tem Kevin DeLeon will lay out his vision for a sustainable future and how California will pave the way for 100% renewable energy. We will then hear a special announcement from the LABC Institute on the release of a new report produced by Dr. Michael Stoll of UCLA on the future of our utility workforce industry. This will kick off the second panel, where state and utility leaders will discuss what California's plan on climate change and clean energy looks like. The panel will look at how policies and infrastructure can support California's climate goals in an age when clean energy markets have no borders. Following a brief break, the afternoon session kicks off with a keynote from LA's very own mayor, Eric Garcetti, on the achievements of LA's Sustainable City Plan and LA's role in the broader national conversation. The third panel will begin with a keynote from JP Morgan Chase's Managing Director and Global Head of Sustainable Finance, Matt Arnold, and a frame by Joby Carlson, Global Director of Sustainable Energy and Operations at Walmart, the nation's largest private sector employer. Finally, the summit will conclude with final remarks, followed by lunch, where everyone here can discuss the many ideas and solutions addressed throughout the day. Please note that today's program will be streaming live on LABC's website, labusinesscouncil.org. The LABC will also be filming portions of the program to air on LA City View Channel 35. Don't forget to tweet, post, and share on social media with the hashtag LABC Sustainability Summit. I would like now to welcome our next speaker, Nadine Watt, whom I had the pleasure to meet just moments ago. Nadine is the first woman to be the chair of the Los Angeles Business Council and is also the president of Watt Companies, where she oversees all commercial investment activities for the company's 6 million square foot portfolio of multifamily, industrial, office, and retail properties. Nadine has successfully led efforts to invest in sustainability, with Watt Plaza being the first building in Century City to receive Platinum LEED certification. Please put your hands together for Nadine Watt.
Thank you, Ivan. Let's give another round of applause for today's MC, Ivan Penn. And a major thank you to all of our business leaders, public officials, and distinguished guests joining us here today. On behalf of the Los Angeles Business Council and the Los Angeles Business Council Institute, thank you for joining us at our 11th Annual Sustainability Summit. Every year we look forward to this outstanding and important event, and we thank the Getty for allowing us to use this inspirational space. We are incredibly grateful for your long-standing commitment to sustainability and partnership with the LABC. Let's put our hands together for our gracious host. Before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge some of the people and organizations that have worked hard to put this event together. I would like to thank our summit co-chairs, Bank of America, California Community Foundation, FivePoint, Hayworth and Unisource Solutions, JP Morgan Chase, the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation, Southern California Gas Company, and Walmart. And our co-hosts, 8 Minute Energy, AT&T, GAF, JMB Realty Corp, LADWP, Parsons, Trammell Crow Company, and Turner Construction, as well as all of our committee members. Without your continued support, today's event would not be possible. I would also like to acknowledge our over 70 cooperating organizations for being with us today and for your help promoting this summit. You will see a list of cooperating organizations in your program guide. We have many distinguished speakers on our program. We also have a number of honored guests in attendance today who are not appearing on stage. Ambassador Carlos Garcia de Alba, Jeff Cooper, Mayor of Culver City, Thomas Small, Vice Mayor of Culver City, Gustavo Camacho, Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Pico Rivera, Thomas Small, Council Member for Culver City, Gary Giro, Chief Sustainability Officer for the County of Los Angeles, LADWP Commissioner Jill Banks-Barad, David Wright, General Manager, LADWP, and Doug Guthrie, President and CEO, Housing Authority, City of Los Angeles. I would also like to acknowledge the honorees from our VIP reception last night, when the LABC awarded former California Senator Fran Pavley and Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia with the Environmental Legacy Award for their work to pass SB 32 and AB 197, which have set the stage for so much of the conversation that will be taking place here today. We also awarded our founding chair and current LABC vice chair, Richard Ziman of Rexford Industrial, for his leadership on sustainability in the public and private sector. The LABC was truly created on the foundation of his pioneering work in the business development, sustainability practices, and commitment to affordable housing. It was a wonderful event last night, and we are excited that so many of you are here that were able to join us. As we all know, Los Angeles and California have been in the spotlight these past several months since the election. The nation has been looking to see how we will respond to change at the federal level that may affect some of our monumental progress on climate change. California has cornered the market on clean air regulation and renewable energy adoption. The state's passage of SB 350 and SB 32 have set ambitious but achievable targets for renewable energy and greenhouse gas emissions reductions that will clean our air and spur the creation of millions of well-paying jobs across the state. You will hear from our speakers today how California will face these challenges head-on and how the private sector plans to continue its investment in sustainability. We will also present to you a letter from the Los Angeles Business Council to our new EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt, calling for a continuation of our strong climate change policies. As part of a series of deregulation, Administrator Pruitt has proposed to eliminate the voluntary Energy Star program, which has resulted in $30 billion per year in energy bill savings at an annual cost of nearly $60 million to taxpayers. More than 16,000 private sector companies and organizations rely on this program that has helped reduce 2.8 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions while greatly reducing energy bills. This letter sends a strong message that businesses firmly support the continuation of this market-driven program with minimal costs and outstanding results. We will also be releasing our newest report out of the LABC Institute, authored by UCLA professor Dr. Michael Stoll on our future utility workforce demands. You will find the executive summary in your program guides and the full report online, www.labusinesscouncil.org. Our first keynote speaker of the day could not be better placed to speak on California's relationship with Washington, D.C. I am thrilled to introduce the man who stood strong for Angelenos and Californians in the U.S. Congress and is now doing so as California's Attorney General. Our first keynote, Attorney General Xavier Becerra, served 12 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. Then he served on the powerful Ways and Means Committee, chaired the House Democratic Caucus, and was ranking member on the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Social Security. For several decades, he has fought for working families, combated poverty among the working poor, and worked to bolster California's job-creating industries. Just this past January, Becerra was sworn in as the 33rd Attorney General and its first Latino to hold the office in the history of our state. Please help me welcome the Honorable Xavier Becerra to the stage.
Good morning. Y'all doing well? It's a little windy, but it's California. Let me begin by thanking Nadine and also Mary Leslie for the work that they have done to make LABC one of the premier organizations to talk about not just what it takes to have economic growth, but to have progress and to do it in a way that makes everyone feel good. I want to be one of those who says I'm a fan, because anytime you can figure out how to do well and, and do good together, you found the secret sauce. And so I say again to Mary for all the great work that she has done, Nadine for being the chair of LABC. I think it's tremendous, and I hope you will continue. To all of you who are here, thank you for considering this important enough to spend your Friday morning with us. So we're here to talk about the Sustainability Summit for 2017. And I will tell you, I think you have to change that. You should name this the Predictability Summit for 2017, because this is about the only place you got predictability in the United States of America right now is in California. We are going to move forward. We are going to continue to do what we have been doing. So I keep going everywhere I can in the state, and I keep telling people who ask me, so what are you going to do about those families who are now receding into the shadows because they're afraid to come out now because of these ICE raids? What are you going to do about the decision by Washington to abandon the Clean Power Plan? What are you going to do about the administration's decision in Washington, D.C. to stop providing consumer information to people who purchase these prepaid cards and how much they're paying in fees? What are you doing to make sure that in California we preserve our gun safety laws that say you just can't pack a concealed weapon simply because you come from the state of Oklahoma or Utah and they let you pack it there? What are you going to do? How are we going to fight against this? And I keep telling them, wait, this is California. We don't do business that way. We're moving forward. We didn't become the 6th largest economy in the world by sitting back. We didn't create more jobs than number 2 Florida or number 3 Texas combined by sitting back. And we didn't have a GDP growth rate in 2015 that was almost double that of the United States of America by going backwards. And so we're going to continue to do what we have to do. And my job as a 33rd Attorney General for the state of California is to have your back as you move forward. It's to make sure that as you do things that are better than Captain Kirk when he went where no man or woman had gone before, that you are going to know you don't have to look back. Because I keep telling you, don't worry, don't turn around, just keep going, because I've got your back. That's my job. And that's why today, I hope we're going to talk about a predictability summit. Because what's more important to a parent than knowing that you can predict what your kids will do? We're still trying to figure that one out, right? What's more important to a business than having predictability? I can't tell you how many times when I was on the tax writing committee, the Ways and Means Committee in Congress, folks would come to me and say, you know what, I can deal with you changing the tax rates, you modifying tax provisions. I can figure out a way if you raise my taxes a bit. So long as I know that that's what's going to happen and that's what it's going to be for the next several years. Because if I can't forecast what you're going to do next year, then it's very difficult for me to plan out my future. Give me predictability. Help me understand that there will be certainty around the corner after you've taken your action. Take your action, but let me know that there's a straight line after that. And I will tell you, in California, we've had a fairly straight line. It's forward. We've got it in drive, forward. I left Washington, D.C., so I can't tell you what kind of line they're trying to follow there. But this is what I will tell you. This is what I have done in the little bit more than 2 months that I've had a chance to be your Attorney General and have your back. Early in March, we announced a $3 million order for payment of civil penalties for Golden Gate Petroleum because it was violating underground fuel storage tank laws, and we made them pay up for polluting the neighboring environment. Thereafter, thank you, shortly after that, about mid-March, we filed a motion to intervene in the case filed by the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers versus the EPA. That's the case where the auto manufacturers were trying to reduce the emission standards that we've had in place as a result of the work of California working with the federal government and other states. By the way, that lawsuit was later dismissed after we filed. I want to say we don't make it sound like there's a connection there, but we did file and they did dismiss. Later that month of March, we issued a statement preparing to defend our country's Clean Power Plan, which, as you've heard, the President of the United States has decided to abandon. Then at the beginning of April, we chose to challenge the U.S. Department of Energy's unlawful delay in energy fuel standards, energy efficiency standards. Everything from light bulbs to ceiling fans to freezers. The administration has decided that energy efficiency is not for them, and so they are abandoning many of those standards that were put in place. We're challenging the administration's ability to just let those go. Thereafter, we also issued a letter to the administrator of the EPA, Scott Pruitt, objecting to his withdrawal of his call for information from oil and mining interests to provide us with the information we need to know how they are conducting their business. This is a critical tool that we've used in the past to figure out where we have to shape, where we have to take our energy and conservation policies, because we know what type of natural resources are being extracted and how they're being used. Well, that information will no longer be available. That data will not be available for us to be able to make the kinds of determinations and assessments we would need to make good policy. And we are now fighting the EPA administrator for his withdrawal of that information request and collection service. About 4 days after that, we delivered a Freedom of Information Act request to the EPA seeking information on Administrator Pruitt's conflicts of interest. As you know, he was the Attorney General for the state of Oklahoma before he became the EPA Administrator. He has now begun taking actions as the EPA Administrator, which may have placed him in conflict with many of the activities that he's supposed to take on behalf of the people of the United States of America. And then finally, we filed a motion to intervene just last week in a lawsuit to defend the energy standards of something as simple as I mentioned before, light bulbs. We're going to just go into court on that one because light bulbs, it turns on in your head easier than it does over there, but light bulbs, we have to defend light bulbs. And this morning I've issued a statement saying that you're not going to drill off the coast of California. And so, so stay tuned. We'll stay active. We're going to do what we need to do to move forward. Because in California, we figured something out. We can do well as we do good. We are going to be a forward-leaning state. Clean air, good-paying jobs, and quality of life, for us, those go hand in hand in the state of California. They're not at odds. You don't have to pick one over the other. Not in California. And I don't think any of us in California believe today that you have to pick profits over the planet. We think there are ways to do this that makes everyone want to continue to live in our state of California. And so we're going to continue to move forward. I think what's the most important thing I can tell you today is that on top of the fact that 2014 was the hottest year on record, except that 2015 became the hottest year on record, except that 2016 became the hottest year on record, is that we're going to rely on facts to drive what we do. And we're going to defend scientists who decide to do their job. And we're going to do one final thing. We're going to do what a good friend and colleague and one of America's civil rights icons taught me very well when he would always say, Javier, you got to get in the way. you got to get in good trouble. And so when John Lewis says to you, you got to get in the way, the 33rd Attorney General for the state of California is going to heed the advice of one of the great civil rights warriors. And when it comes to California, saving our environment, moving forward on clean energy, making California a place where we want to live, and making it an example for the rest of the country, I'm going to get in the way. So thank you very much for being here. And I say to you, thank you for getting in the way. Thank you. Thank you.
Please now welcome to the stage one of today's sustainability keynotes from FivePoint, Greg McWilliams, Regional President.
They told me backstage that introduction came from the voice of God. That's what they call it. And I didn't realize that the sustainability conference would be such a spiritual experience. But we're truly glad to be here, and want to thank, Wall Street has sort of a category that they put top management teams in, and it's called Best in Class. And I just want to thank Mary Leslie and her team at LABC, because they truly are the best in class. I represent FivePoint Communities. FivePoint Communities is a very large master plan developer in California, maybe one of the largest. We are developing properties from Northern California to Southern California. And in Northern California, actually San Francisco, we're developing the Hunters Point Shipyard, Candlestick Park, Treasure Island, and the Concord Naval Weapons Station. In Orange County, we are developing the Great Park Communities, which is formerly the El Toro Marine Base. But what we're here to present today is a very unique opportunity. Just 10 miles north of the Los Angeles city line is a community called Santa Clarita. And in that community, for the last 40 years, we have been developing Valencia. It's a unique opportunity for us, and what many people don't realize is that Santa Clarita, the city of Santa Clarita, is the third largest city in Los Angeles and the third largest economic engine. And within Santa Clarita, we have developed over the last 40 years Valencia, and we've achieved some milestones: 33% open space and a 3-to-1 jobs housing balance. The next iteration of that is called Newhall Ranch. And since the first approval of Newhall Ranch in 2003, we have been moving forward with many iterations and challenges, but we are now at the cutting edge of something that we're going to present today that I believe is unique. So unique that it's the first of its kind in the country and perhaps the nation. Newhall Ranch will be the first community that will be net zero GHG emissions. The first of its class, and it will be, it's a master plan that when you start with a blank canvas, we are able to program a lot of the technologies, and we will present later, some of the types of unique opportunities that will be even outside the fold of Newhall Ranch that will actually benefit Los Angeles County, the state of California, and the world. So I am on a tight schedule here, and I want to introduce our Chief Information Officer to present and run you through this unique opportunity. His name is Steve Churm. He's former newspaperman, publisher, editor, and is really going to get into the details. Steve?
Thank you, Greg, and good morning, everyone. You know, I can't think of a more perfect place to talk about sustainability than this regal setting like this museum. There are so many, as most of you know, sustainable works of art. These are pieces that are timeless and still powering our imagination as much or more today than when they were first created. So I'm really inspired to be here on a Friday, and I thank you again for the opportunity to talk about a project that we think is unprecedented. You know, for the past, let me get here, just figure this out here, we go. For the past century, California has led this nation on so many game-changing fronts. In the 1930s and 40s, led by Walt Disney, Hollywood and the movie industry was born here. In the 60s and 70s, Southern California was the center of aerospace. And then in the 90s, California led the technology revolution, and Silicon Valley emerged as the epicenter of computer innovation, and today the digital age that has changed all of our lives. And today the state, under the leadership of our governor and the state legislature, is leading the fight nationally and globally to slow climate change. We at Newhall and FivePoint understand California's DNA and its rich history as this remarkable place of innovation and a bellwether of change. Why? Because we were born here. We and our associates live in the communities we are designing and building. At FivePoint, a land developer, we feel this ingrained responsibility to build mixed-use communities today with homes, schools, and recreation, open space, retail, entertainment, transit hubs, and commercial, all of which is truly sustainable. It is why Newhall Ranch in the Santa Clarita Valley, just 30 miles from this grand auditorium, has proposed a plan that we believe will do for land development in this state that Tesla has done for the automobile, that Apple has done for mobile devices, and Google has done for the internet. It is why FivePoint and Newhall Ranch are taking on the groundbreaking challenge of becoming the most environmentally sustainable master plan community of its size in the nation with zero net greenhouse gas emissions. We believe this project is a paradigm shift when it comes to meeting California's critical needs in terms of housing, jobs, and delivering a carbon-free lifestyle. It is our promise to California. As Greg mentioned, in California, from Orange County in the south to the Bay Area in the north, FivePoint today is the largest mixed-use master plan land developer in California, already entitled for more than 40,000 residential homes, including 6,000 affordable units, 21 million square feet of commercial, and more than 15,000 acres of permanent open space. In Orange County, as Greg said, we are building Great Park neighborhoods and the 688-acre Orange County Great Park on the former El Toro Marine Corps Air Station. In the Bay Area, we're transforming Hunters Point Naval Shipyard and Candlestick Point into thriving new communities just 4 miles south of San Francisco's financial district. We are also managing and redeveloping Treasure Island and beginning the planning with East Bay area specialists and city people for the future of another former naval weapons base. But it is here, in the heart of Santa Clarita Valley, where our most ambitious project is located, just 8 short miles from the LA city limits and adjacent to the city of Santa Clarita, the third largest city in Los Angeles County. It is ambitious, it is unprecedented, it is a plan to build an entire city with net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Through a diverse mix of on-site measures and off-site strategies, our company plans to build at Newhall Ranch 21,500 homes and 11.5 million square feet of commercial space, all with net zero GHG. It is a $12 billion investment that we believe will be the most sustainable community of its scale in America and most likely the world. Now, as some of you know, this effort to build Newhall Ranch has been a 20-plus year journey through the approval and legal process. A little over a year ago, we were asked to take another look at our greenhouse gas analysis. We were never told what we needed to do and where we needed to go. In the end, our team decided, rather than guess at a GHG target, let's go where no other development in this state and, frankly, this country has ever gone. We decided to develop a community with all climate change causing greenhouse gases from both construction and operation reduced or mitigated to zero. We want to set a new paradigm for land development and community building in California. We call it Net Zero Newhall. Now, there are really three ways we're addressing this challenge: the built environment, transportation, and then a very robust off-site direct GHG reduction series of programs. In the built environment, our plan is to have vertical structures, residential, commercial, public buildings that produce as much energy as they consume. For example, solar tiles on nearly all homes and commercial buildings constructed to the highest energy efficient standards. We're also making significant and major and will be investments in the area of clean transportation with electric vehicle charging stations in every home. Also, charging stations for another 2,000 vehicles in commercial and community areas of Newhall Ranch, subsidies for electric vehicle purchases, an electric school bus program, and investing in electrifying public transit and locally and regionally. All of this will be done in collaboration with Plug-in America, one of a half dozen nationally recognized NGOs we are working with on this initiative. In addition, Newhall Ranch will deliver an unprecedented community-wide transportation plan directly addressing the all-important first and last-mile solutions for residents and workers. We will build mobility hubs and offer transit subsidies for workers within Newhall Ranch and for our affordable housing residents. Our hubs will have car share and bike share options. Now, we know that when planning Newhall Ranch, we can only reduce about 53% of the GHG emissions during construction and operation. Therefore, we need to add off-site mitigation measures to this unprecedented plan. In Los Angeles County, for instance, we will provide EV charging for another 2,000 vehicles at strategic locations across the basin. And we will provide energy-efficient upgrades to public buildings and some schools in disadvantaged communities, working in partnership with the good folks at Climate Resolve. Elsewhere, we will be purchasing forest land in California and permanently protecting trees through a forest carbon sequestration program. And we are identifying in the Central Valley dairy farms for methane emissions capture programs. And finally, we will be installing tens of thousands of clean burning cook stoves in sub-Saharan Africa, where 80% of the population currently cooks by burning copious amounts of wood in primitive setups. It is a serious health threat to those indigenous populations, particularly women and children, and it is a serious pollution problem. Our cook stove program, one of a growing number in Africa, will help combat these issues. We know accountability is key to our off-site mitigation plans. It is why we are working with the largest and most trusted off-site registry in North America, Climate Action Reserve, to quantify and confirm our carbon emission reductions once we begin operation. Now, this plan will only work if we are disciplined and adaptable in our delivery. We are committed because Net Zero Newhall is an initiative that is consistent with the newly approved legislation and Governor Brown's desires and goals to reduce California's greenhouse gas emissions. Net Zero Newhall is in lockstep with the hopes and the desires of Californians, and that includes our nearly 200 associates at FivePoint. To that end, our plans for Newhall Ranch call for permanently protecting 10,000 acres of open space and creating 50 miles of trails into areas that have not, to this point, been publicly accessible. And Newhall Ranch will require no additional water, thanks to 21st century management practices, including recycled water for irrigation and a new reclamation plant to convert, in part, our historic water allocations for agriculture to commercial uses. Equally important, Newhall Ranch will become an economic engine for Southern California. 21,500 new homes in a state that may be short 3.5 million housing units by 2025, according to the latest McKinsey report. Newhall Ranch will also create 60,000 permanent jobs. It will deliver more than $380 million a year in additional property taxes to Los Angeles County, $410 million a year in additional income taxes, and $21 billion in total economic activity. And we believe it will become a new hub for technology, jobs, and innovation right next to the third largest city in Los Angeles County, Santa Clarita. And all of this just 8 miles from the city limits of Los Angeles. In closing, we believe Newhall Ranch will rethink what's possible. It will become a new paradigm for creating master plan communities in this great state of California. And we believe it will become a national model for environmental responsibility, an enduring and model investment in the future. And it will become a true legacy project that we all can be proud of in California today and beyond. We are shaping California's future today. We're excited about Newhall Ranch. We appreciate you listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg and Steve, for sharing details about the first net zero master plan community in the nation, which brings us to the next part of our program, our first panel. They're going to be addressing the path to net zero and water-independent buildings. Michael Northrop, Program Director of Sustainable Development at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, will moderate this panel. First, please welcome Ed Mazria, founder and CEO of Architecture 2030. Ed Mazria is an author, researcher, and teacher, in addition to being an internationally recognized architect who has worked with the Organization of Economic Cooperation and the UN Framework Convention on achieving zero emissions in the built environment. He is the founder of Architecture 2030, a think tank developing real-world solutions for 21st century problems, where he recently developed Achieving Zero, a framework of incremental actions that cities and governments can put in place to ensure carbon-neutral built environments by mid-century. Please welcome Ed Mazria.
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about Achieving Zero because that's basically where we need to go in a very, very short period of time. I'll talk about why we need to get there, and I'll spend most of my time on how we're actually going to do that. So first, you may have heard the under 2 degrees Celsius scenario where we need to keep the planet under 2 degrees global warming. You might have also heard the phrase 1.5, that's what we need to shoot for. So let me put that in context. Let me give you the science. The scientific community ran 4 scenarios. 3 scenarios don't make it. The planet goes way past 2 degrees C. The 4th scenario is a peaking between now and 2020, essentially a 2020 peak of global greenhouse gas emissions, and then phasing out all CO2 emissions from fossil fuels by about 2070, 2080. The scientific community gives us about a 66% chance of staying under that 2 degrees C. They call this the 2 degrees C scenario. But they also said that gives us a 33% chance of overshoot, and I'll show you why that's really critical, of overshooting 2 degrees C. So they ran essentially a 5th scenario, and they call that the 1.5 degrees C scenario. And that's phasing between now and 2020 and phasing out all fossil fuel greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. That's why you hear all this talk about 80 by 50 or 0 by 50. That 2050 date is critical if we're to have a really high probability of staying under 2 degrees C. And why is that critical? All the scenarios they ran, once you go sail past that 2 degrees C, climate change becomes irreversible. That means the planet just keeps on heating. There's so much inertia in the CO2 level in the atmosphere. So if we go past 2 degrees C, it's impossible to bring the planet back. If we stay under 2 degrees C, then, and we phase out CO2 emissions, then the planet actually begins to return to pre-industrial conditions, to the climate we've always known. So that's the key. That 2050 date is really important. Now let's talk about California. By 2050, California's population is expected to increase by 11.6 million people between now and then. Let me put that in perspective here. That's the equivalent of the entire population of the state of Oregon and Washington combined. That means all the people that are in the state of Washington and Oregon, they're not going to move down here, but you're going to increase your population by about that much. Those are the projections. It's huge. And what about now Los Angeles County? They're going to absorb about 12% of that, 1.4 million people. That is the equivalent of adding the population of the city of San Diego into Los Angeles County. That's either we see it as a huge opportunity, but if it's not done right, it could obviously be disastrous. We know that urban environments are responsible for about 75% of all greenhouse gas emissions. That means cities. And in cities, the largest portion of the greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to the building sector. And that's why we're here to talk about buildings and how we get them under control. This is California's electricity consumption from 1990 up until the present. It's been rising, but then you see something happen in around 2004 to 2008, 2006. It kind of reaches a peak and then levels out. Doesn't go down, but it levels out, even though California is still growing. If we take a look at its gas consumption, it rises, and then in about 1998, 2000, it reaches a peak. Then it starts slowly dropping. California's temperatures are increasing slightly, and then it drops somewhat dramatically in 2014, 2015, and it stays down there through 2016 as California's temperature actually goes up quite dramatically. What we see is that in California, even though we're adding billions of square feet, roughly a billion additional square feet between 2000 and 2014 of buildings, that energy consumption is not going up. And that's an incredible achievement. That's commercial buildings, about $1 billion, and residential buildings, California's added about $1.5 billion, 1.6 billion square feet during that period. So 2.5, close to 3 billion square feet it's added, and emissions and energy consumption have not gone up. If we take a look at Los Angeles, we see essentially the same thing. This is electricity consumption in LA, flat. Gas consumption in Los Angeles, flat. So even though we're adding buildings, they're not increasing energy consumption or emissions. The reason is that the new buildings are coming in very efficient, and the renovations that are taking place are offsetting the energy and emissions from new buildings. However, the curve is not bending down, and that's where we need to go now. So while we've reached one milestone, we need to get ready for the next milestone. So how do we meet California's 80 by 2050 greenhouse gas emissions reduction target? There are essentially three strategies that need to happen. The first is that high-performance buildings and new buildings and major renovations need to be very, very high performance. The second is that we need to renovate the existing building stock to deep efficiency renovations to reduce the consumption and emissions of that stock. And the third part of the strategy is that we need to phase in renewable energy to pick up the rest, because buildings will use energy to get down to that 80%. So let's talk about high performance, new buildings, and major renovations. This scale 0 to 100, 100 equals the average building in the US in 2003, and in 2012 they did another study, and we've moved way down on that scale to roughly 84. So where does California fit into that? Well, Title 24 in 2013, the energy code was all the way down to 51.5, and then the 2016 code, which you're under now, is at 47.6, and there are a number of jurisdictions and cities in California that are actually pushing the boundary and moving their codes even further down the line. So California is moving toward that zero goal in commercial buildings. In residential buildings, Title 24, 2013 is at 72, 2016 is at 50. We just heard that California, its 2019 code will move even further down to 45 on the efficiency scale, and then if you add in solar, like we saw in the project just before us, it's getting way, way down to nearly net zero, to a 24 on the scale. So California's codes are moving in the right direction. So in order to high performance in new building design, in order to meet that, major renovations, California is almost there with its codes and its stretch codes. So what about the next two pieces, deep efficiency renovations and renewable energy? And this is where it gets a little tricky. The deep efficiency renovations are the key. How do we get deep efficiency renovations in the building stock in order to get our consumption and emissions down to nearly zero, or at least to 80 by 50? The key is looking at building intervention points, when construction is going to take place, and that's the time to do the efficiency upgrades. So, first thing is capital improvement cycles, or when a major renovation is going to go on, that's the time to do an upgrade. When you're upgrading for seismic, like there are certain ordinances that are now taking a route in California, when you're opening the building up, or flooding. If you're renovating for flooding, you want to do the efficiency upgrades. When you're going in for a zoning or use change, and the city is actually giving something up and increasing the value of a property, they need to require efficiency upgrades. And the last is when the building changes hands, there's a normal cycle that when a new owner comes in, they're going to do some amount of renovation, and we want to encourage them to do efficiency renovations at the same time. The key to all this is the capital improvement cycle. And we have to essentially optimize any program we develop to that cycle. Why is that so important? Because efficiency conservation measures that are undertaken at a capital improvement cycle, when a building undergoes its renovation through its lifetime, cost 75% less than if it happens not as part of a capital improvement cycle, just on its own. Then it costs a fortune. So it's not cost effective. So everything needs to be timed to this capital improvement cycle of buildings. And so how do we do that? We've undertaken some studies of cities around the country for small buildings, 20, 25, 30,000 square feet. You set that marker depending upon certain conditions. For those buildings have a high transaction rate. For New York City, for example, 99% of all buildings transacted last year were under 25,000 square feet, mostly homes. And in that case, a new owner coming in is going to do some work on the building. And through its natural cycle, between now and 2050, that building will get renovated once, twice, 3 times, and it'll have to meet the codes. So California's codes are already set up to take care of that building stock in terms of moving it toward very, very low energy consumption by 2050. So we say leave that stock alone for now, and in 2030, review that and make sure that it's on track to get you all the way down that scale where you need to be by 2050. And if it's not, then you can implement some programs. However, for large buildings, 20, 25,000 square feet and over, they actually use 60, 70% of all the energy produced in the state, even though they're a much, much smaller percentage of buildings. They have an extremely low transaction rate. So institutional buildings, universities, hospitals, government buildings, office buildings don't turn over that quickly. So there'll need to be a policy. So we talk about an incremental, market-optimized efficiency upgrade policy that goes along with the normal renovation cycles. And there needs to be incentives when that normal renovation cycle happens to do really deep efficiency renovations. And this is what a policy should look like. In 2025, we're calling for a 10% across all buildings, large buildings, a 10% energy consumption reduction in 2025 minimum. And then that moves up the scale to a 60% minimum reduction by 2050. That gets us down the line toward that 80 by 50 reduction. And buildings built in 2016 or later, you saw the code is so efficient that they're already way past that 60% of the average building reduction that they should be exempt, or any building that already meets and that will meet the 2016 code, and there are some that do now because they've renovated to a higher standard. Those are also exempt from any of this policy. So we should hit, and 2013 buildings built in 2013 and even slightly before that are very efficient. So they'll need to do very, very little. But most buildings older than that will be coming up on a renovation cycle, and they would need to meet a 10% energy consumption reduction. We also say that they should be able to put up a letter of credit, add an additional five years if they haven't hit a cycle, so that we make sure that we get them at that cycle where efficiency renovations are cost effective. And in that case, we ask that they put up a bond or a letter of credit that's refundable if they do the renovation. And the city or the state should also have incentives for when that capital improvement cycle takes place, that they should skip a bunch of cycles and do really deep efficiency renovations so that they don't have to come back and do small upgrades each time. And at every cycle, there's always a way to add another 5 years if you're not on your improvement cycle. And then we say that a compliance option, and in New York, this is going to be going into effect, that not only do you have to do building efficiency, but you can offset that efficiency with on-site or purchased renewables. And in that case, it's up to 50% of the total reduction that you need to meet. So you begin to create a more robust market for renewable energy. So on deep efficiency renovations, there'll need to be a policy for large buildings, and it needs to be an optimized approach, a market-optimized approach, and a review of small buildings in 2030. And by allowing an alternative compliance by on-site renewables or actually purchasing a percentage of off-site renewables, you then create the marketplace for renewable energy. Now, there are two sides to this energy consumption coin. And what we've been talking about really is what we call building operations. And that's a major chunk of it. But there's another side to the coin that we'll discuss on the panel, which is water consumption and moving water around and the energy it takes to do all that. In California, it probably has the highest percentage of energy consumption attributed to water. Over 19% of all electricity consumption is attributed to just moving water and using water and heating water and doing all those things with water, and a lot of it, a big percentage of that has to do with water use in buildings and treating water and wastewater in buildings. So we'll talk a bit about that on the panel. So we know that given current conditions that we will not see a top-down approach to this problem. But that's not where the rubber hits the road. The rubber really hits the road from the bottom up. So any viable policy, even when the federal government was introducing different incentives and policy, almost all activity happens from the bottom up. So the way to get a handle on this is through state and local government action with stakeholder buy-in, which is a key component of this issue. And with that, thank you, and we'll bring on the panel.
Good morning. Is this working? Is this mic working? Yeah, awesome, great.
Nice job. Thanks.
Good morning again. Hi. It's great to be here. Ed, thank you so much. That was fantastic, as it always is. Ed's got the best PowerPoint presentations of anybody I know. You know, when I first met Ed about 10 years ago in my job at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, where I work on climate change, I think like most of the people in this room, maybe I shouldn't assume that, but I thought the way you dealt with climate change was mostly by dealing with electricity. And so I thought a lot about coal and renewables and what policies we needed to move those things around. You know, thought a little bit about transportation too. But as I've gotten to know Ed over the last 10 years, I've learned from him, from lots of him hammering me on the head with it, that buildings are maybe the most central opportunity for us to be thinking about as we think about how to deal with climate change. So this is actually a very important conversation, and it's super timely, and we're in the right place, because California and Los Angeles are such leaders in this space. And just think about buildings for a minute. You know, they, as Ed's slide showed, in cities, which are 75% of energy use globally, and a rapidly urbanizing world, that percentage will go up. Something between 50 and 75% of energy use is in buildings. And it's where the electricity gets used. It's also, it turns out, a real nexus point for where transportation happens, because we park in our buildings or around our buildings, or mass transit gets us to our buildings. So it becomes a real center point, a real synthetic place and point to be thinking about doing the things that we need to do to deal with climate change. And I think one of the reasons why people like me found it hard to figure this out initially was that, you know, we tend to live in our silos. You know, people work on energy efficiency and appliances. We work on transportation and vehicles and mass transit. You know, we work on land use, whatever it is. And it's hard for our brains to put all those things in one place at one time and be thinking comprehensively and systematically about it. And I think what Ed does better than anybody is really help us think about how we draw these things together, think about them, work on them together. So anyway, Ed, thanks for that. And I've learned a ton. And I know others over longer periods of time have learned a lot from Ed. We also today, you know, first, thanks to the LABC for spending some time on this, because I think it's really worthwhile. And for a real estate-based organization to be thinking about this seems really appropriate, right? So it's fantastic. We happen to be also in the state where the policy paradigm that is driving us toward the solutions is most advanced. And we've got this amazing panel of folks who live and work and make policy in California. So I think we're going to actually, in rapid fire, because we probably only have about 45 minutes to do this, we're going to cover a lot of territory. But nobody has led on this more than Andrew McAllister, who's a commissioner at the California Energy Commission. And when you think about where policy starts on net zero buildings or zero carbon buildings, it's Andrew McAllister, and it's California. And as most of you, I hope, know, you have rules on the books in California that all new residential buildings will be net zero carbon by 2020, and that all new commercial buildings in California will be net zero carbon by 2030. This is huge. This is a really, really big deal. And I think California labored in obscurity for a while on this, but the rest of the country has picked up on it. And while states haven't necessarily followed the good lead of Andrew and the California Energy Commission, a lot of cities have really begun to pay attention. And now there are several working groups of cities around the country that have already put on the books programs and mandates and commitments to get to net zero. And there are many, many others in large networks of cities looking at this in a serious way now. So it's a really, really important thing that is happening here. So Andrew, you know, as we think about this, as we think about these 2020 and 2030 kind of moments, how's it going?
Well, you know, not to put me on the hook, I guess. Huh? So I get to be out in front, but we have, you know, a sizable staff at the Energy Commission that really digs in on the details, and details matter on this stuff. You know, I won't get into them here, but you know, the real estate industry and all the stakeholders, environmentalists, everybody, we all as Californians have a big stake in this conversation. And one thing I'm most proud of is that we have a process in California that is open, transparent, fact-based. And gets to an answer that is actually buildable buildings in the real world. And that's important because we have to have that connection, or else the reality we won't follow the curves that Ed laid out. We'll say we're doing it in theory, and then it won't happen. So we really have to keep trued up. I'm very proud of the coalition or the stakeholder base and the relationships that we've built with you know, the CBIA and the business properties all the way over to the NRDC and Sierra clubs. They all participate, and that's what gives our code, I think, the strength that it has and the staying power that it has. Every 3 years, we push the envelope on the building code. So the goal is a state policy goal that was articulated starting in about 2005. It's an agency goal. It remains an agency goal. It's not a statutory goal to get to zero net energy by 2020, 2030. But you know, Z&E has a compelling narrative. It's just something that people can relate to. It's building sized, and it's a really nice organizing principle. So the way we see it at the Energy Commission is that we statutorily have to, mandatory measures and mandatory code has to be cost effective. So we have to make a finding that it's cost effective. In the era of cheap natural gas, that has some challenges, right? And when new technologies come on, they tend to be kind of pricey. So we have a process that's very intentional that is starting with RD&D, research development, demonstration. We fund hundreds of millions of dollars of that across the state. We work with everybody up and down the supply chain for buildings. Then we do demonstration projects. We learn from those. We find ways to create voluntary paths for new technologies and then encourage the builders and funders of those buildings and owners of those buildings to do those innovative things. That then creates a marketplace that gets the cost down, and then we can think about in the next cycle making that mandatory. And that's what we've done over the last 30, 40 years. So we've gotten to the point where the 2019 cycle that will be the 2020 code will be very close to mandatory zero net energy with very simple glide paths for the marketplace to take that baton and hit zero net energy or zero net carbon or kind of whatever people want to buy, right? So a lot of, it's market-based. So I think the technologies that are out there are unbelievable, and in the commercial, both retrofit and new construction, in the residential, we have incredible technology options, and the buildings themselves, I think it's very important to understand that those are products. We can talk about energy and water, but people actually live and work in these buildings. And so a lot of the selling point for clean is actually functionality. So low carbon and low energy happen to come along with better products, right? So a building that is a tilt-up retrofit or new construction commercial building can be a total pleasure to work in. If you're a lawyer working in one of these buildings, well, you get close to the building and it knows you're coming, and it fixes up your room the way you like it with the right lighting levels and the temperature and the window tinting and everything. It just sets in. When you leave, it saves all the energy because it knows it doesn't have to do that anymore. So that saves energy. But those buildings also, the value proposition is that they have better tenant retention. They're more comfortable. Tenants like them. They're willing to pay more rent. They have lower capital costs, say, on the HVAC system that can be much smaller. They save in many, many ways, and all of that adds up, if you're the building owner, to a cash flow positive, part of which is energy, but mostly it's other things. And so that's the value proposition that we work with at the Energy Commission, even though we only have this one little sliver. So we work through a process that gets to a real-world solution that works, and I think that's what people look at. The stretch codes that we put together in parallel with the mandatory code are then the ones that go out into the world, and Santa Monica and Palo Alto and LA and others take pieces of that, and they push the envelope, they do the innovation. And I think it's highly, highly important to understand that the state is very progressive, and Jerry, every time I see him, he's like, how's the doubling of energy efficiency for 350 going? Don't screw that up. And he uses more flowery language than that. So obviously we take this very seriously. But I think the local governments are the ones that provide a lot of the really contextualization and the value and the market kind of hardening, of this ecosystem, and that is just invaluable. At the state level, necessarily, given the diversity and the size of our state, we sort of end up with a little bit of least common denominator solutions, and we apply those across the board. And then the local governments really take it and give it a fine grain. So I think, the electricity grid of today is not what it was in 2005 when we started talking about this. We have cheap PV, which is incredible. We have an RPS, so the grid is cleaner than it was. We have a lot of positive levers that we have more efficiency technologies. We're in the digital age, way more than we were then, so we have communications, we have automation. So those are all for the good. We also do have cheap natural gas. We have these cost-effectiveness limits. We have a few constraints around what we can accomplish. So we hold hands with the marketplace, and we get there in a way that's very collaborative. And I think in this day and age, particularly, California is setting that example for how we articulate our goals and how we really march towards them in a very open and transparent way. And I think we want to set that example as well as the sort of innovation, technology development example.
As I've watched this develop, I've been amazed that the pushback hasn't been bigger, and I think it must be partly because you have such a transparent and smart and kind of quantitative-based process that talks about the economics, so it's really amazing. So talking just before we move on, one of those early adopters, Santa Monica, I saw it on Ed's slide, it had gone all the way to 0 on your chart. Starting in May, like tomorrow, next week, all new residential buildings in Santa Monica will have to be net zero. That's amazing, right? And what have you taken from that? Has that helped you accelerate elsewhere in the state too?
Well, so that's a perfect example of this leadership that the local governments provide. Now, Santa Monica is not a typical community in California, right? So their city council decided, hey, this is something we're willing to do, and it's mostly built out. It's relatively affluent, and so that's a different context than, say, the Coachella Valley or another place, the Central Valley generally. I mean, you have low-income populations that maybe wouldn't. The jurisdictions might not go that far. But Lancaster, which you could qualify as a lower income place, they're looking at zero net energy. They've done mandatory PV. I mean, they're doing this as well. So the local jurisdictions have to come to the Energy Commission and ask permission to do this. If they're going to go beyond code, we have to confirm that it saves energy, that it's more green than the base code, right? We have to make sure it doesn't violate the statewide code. Now, the local governments, we are relatively permissive. So if they want to make assumptions about, say, the cost of carbon or some of the social benefits that they want to encourage in their built environment, then we can allow them to do that. And that's what we did with Santa Monica. That's different than saying we're going to take exactly what they did and apply it statewide, because that wouldn't necessarily be good policy even. But I think they then do this, get the cost down, get developers comfortable, with building these buildings, and then we can say, hey, we're going to learn from that and really incorporate it into something that looks more like the mandatory code over time. So those local government examples, and here in LA, just to put a local point on it, there are myriad ways that LA leads. I'm sure Ted will talk about this, but with cool roofs and other areas. But the multifamily is a big issue right now. Low income is a huge issue in the state. How are we going to bring along the 30% of the state that really does have trouble making ends meet, and first-home buyers, young families? We really have to keep them in mind, and we've done a lot of work recently on that. We need resources to get into our low-income multifamily buildings that Ed was talking about, needing a kick in the pants at the capital improvement, at the rehab. That only happens every 15 to 20 years. Yeah. So one of the things I'm looking for ways to do, and I want to collaborate with anybody who can sort of bring ideas to the table here, is we need a facility that can kick in some money to those low-income developers during that incredibly complex financial package construction time when they're rehabbing their building. Every building in the state only has 1 to 2 rehabilitations, rebuilds that it's going to do between now and 2050. So we have 1 or 2 opportunities to get into these buildings and do deep retrofits. So that takes resources, and we need to come up with those resources and really do a systematic touch on those buildings. LA would be the perfect place to start on that.
So moving over to the private sector, Randy Britt is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Vanir Construction here in LA and a longtime member of the LABC and a contributor at these meetings. Tell us about your Riverside project. You've got a net zero project going on in Riverside.
We do. Thanks, Michael. We're actually program managers for the entire project, which means that we're working with the architects and engineers as the owner's representative to ensure that the building gets designed to meet the goals of the client. In this case, it's DGS and CARB, to achieve zero net energy and also to achieve LEED Platinum in version 4, which is going to be quite a challenge for this facility because it's an emission testing facility. So it's challenging in that respect. And then you also put into the mix that it's in an urban environment. So we talk about doing zero net energy, and you think, well, I'm going to put a building out in the country and I'm going to have 10 acres of land, I'll put a megawatt of solar or 2 on the ground and I'll be able to offset all my load. Not the case in this particular instance. So we have to find creative ways to be able to achieve that. And certainly we start with the building envelope, in this instance. And so the architects are looking at what they can do with, making the building envelope as efficient as they can. In my prior experience, we've also done things with electrochromatic glazing, which, changes the tint of the windows to darker based on commands from the energy management system. And so we can fluctuate, we can control the building envelope temperature gain through that process. We look at the highest efficiency air conditioning systems. We look at everything we can do in terms of lighting. LEDs, of course, are making magnificent strides in the last several years, becoming more efficient, better quality, and more cost effective as it goes. So all those things are adding up to help us with that. And then we have to find creative ways then to also get renewable energy on site. And so there's carports, of course, have been done for several years. But we also have to look at BIPV in a different way, the building integrated photovoltaic. So we have to look at what that means. There's, again, better strides in BIPV technology towards becoming more cost effective and more efficient as it goes. So that's helping us as well. And the other thing in the mix is energy storage. And I think that's going to be the next big play for us. Certainly was discussed at prior summits here that that's the next big push. There will be incentives issued to help businesses and public agencies install energy storage, and it'll help reduce the on-peak energy in a significant way if the strategies are maximized.
So as a member of the private sector, with the fast approaching set of mandates, how do you react to these things? Do you think your community is going to be okay with this?
I think so. I think when you look at the past and the past track record of what we've done with any kind of energy efficiency or renewable energy, public sector has always led the way first because they're the ones that can make the investment, test the technologies, and then basically prove it to the private sector that it can be done and bring the costs down so the private sector can invest. And then you look at the importance of incentives that Ed referred to, and incentives are going to be critical for the private sector to buy in. Yeah. But I think it'll happen, and as these mandates come forward, and they're required to do so, they'll find ways to do it, and they'll find ways to do it economically. But the public sector is already going into it. So the CARB example is a good one, where you have an agency of the state that's really investing in going to zero net energy, it will serve as an example to the private sector of how to get it done, and get it done cost effectively, and be able to move forward.
That's great. I'm amazed. It's amazing that it's sailing forward so well, so positively, which is great. So Gina Heng is the Vice President and General Manager of the Photovoltaic Division of Mitsubishi Electric. And you guys play a role in this in a big way, obviously. How do you think about this?
Yeah, as far as solar is concerned, in achieving
Your
net zero.
Your products are going into these buildings.
Yeah. In order for buildings to be net zero, there has to be some form of on-site energy generator. And solar, by its nature and form, lends itself to be a very good choice. And therefore, it is a very common technology of choice by many in such zero-energy projects. The reason solar is, can I use a...
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's not.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah. The reason solar, like I say again, is flexible and modular is because it could be installed on rooftop, carports, or any shade structure, or even ground mount. And solar by itself, of course, can also be very cost effective. Before we go into that, there are many other on-site generators that could be used. For instance, fuel cell, biomass, or even wind. And the attractiveness of solar is that it could work very easily with any of these technologies on-site. And that lends itself very well to be a choice of an on-site generator. The other thing, like I talked earlier about, is that the cost of solar has been declining over the past 5 years. The total system cost has come down both in soft and hard costs. The other thing too is that it has little to no maintenance, and it also has a very low carbon footprint. For all these reasons, solar is an ideal choice as an on-site generator. The solar deployment, the success of solar last year is phenomenal and is very encouraging. For the first time in our history, solar ranks #1 as a new electricity generating capacity.
Okay.
It leads by 39%, followed by natural gas at 29% and wind at 26%. So that tells us that solar is real, is feasible, and is happening. It doesn't matter what anybody else tells you. So last year alone, a new solar installation was installed every 84 seconds. So what does that tell us? At the end of this 1 hour session, how many systems will be done? Anybody? 42.
Higher math.
So that tells us again, it is real. At the same time, we can prove because the industry alone generated 260,000 jobs last year. And 100,000 of those jobs are in California alone. And that also tells us that this is twice the number of jobs that in solar as it is in the top 5 utilities combined. So guys, it's real and it's happening.
That's great. Fantastic. Is Mitsubishi involved in other parts of the net zero challenge? Are you doing other things, other technologies that you're providing?
Of course, Mike. Thank you for asking that question because now it lends me the opportunity to do a shameless pitch.
Good.
So, but seriously, to meet the goals of net zero, we all have to reduce, reuse, and recycle all the energy that we have in the buildings. And in order to do that, you have to have very high efficient, energy efficient solutions. And to answer your question directly, of course we have generators, solar panels. Besides that, of course, we also have the state-of-the-art cooling and heating technology that we have that not only provides unmatched comfort, like I think everybody here is aware of. We have people living in the building. Every human wants to be comfortable. So we have unmatched comfort. At the same time, our technology also qualifies owners to meet up to 28 lead points in the area of energy and atmosphere and indoor air quality. And of course, we have as well our ever reliable vertical transportation. The escalators and the elevators also use one of the most advanced energy saving technology. It's called EliSave. And EliSave is an electricity recycling system. Don't ask me how it works, but we can definitely show you. Lastly, of course, you can save what you can measure. So what we are doing every day now is to figure out, working on the total building solution that will continue to integrate and optimizes all the equipment that is used in a building that will help to meet the net zero goal, not just in a building per se, but also a whole entire community. So it's real.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's great. So, turning to Los Angeles, Ted, you actually know something about this topic. You teach a course at UCLA. Ted, if you don't know him, is also responsible for infrastructure in LA, so he's the guy who has to figure this stuff out. So, given all of this, the mandates that are coming, et cetera, how's Los Angeles going to do with all this? And maybe if you could just say a little bit about cost effectiveness and ratepayer impact along the way. And I know you're also thinking about net zero water issues in addition to electricity. So could you wrap all that into kind of a quick summary of how you're doing?
Sure, I'll try. But first, I also want to extend a thanks to Ed. You know, when I was 12 years ago designing California's first zero energy affordable housing projects under a contract with the CEC, I'd wonder, you know, in those moments of extreme frustration, what it all meant. And, you know, Ed, you were always someone who was like, making sure that we understood that each individual building, each individual project sort of was going to add up to a big impact along the way. And so, thanks for your leadership over the many, many years. I think if it's right, if we're going to meet our carbon goals, we have to sort of keep our eye on the prize of this net zero question. This morning I woke up and I sort of looked out the window and I turned to my wife and I said, done, 100% wind. And we almost just sort of stayed in bed all day, but seriously. I think what we're going to see in Los Angeles and what we're working towards under the leadership of our Mayor Eric Garcetti, who's really asked us to think big and be disruptive about this stuff, is sort of working at 3 scales. So I think we're going to be working, we are working at the individual building scale, both in the public sector and the private sector. So our Bureau of Engineering currently has 3 net zero buildings under design. They are relatively simple buildings. They're gymnasiums in existing parks. So big roofs, relatively simple systems, but they're going to do a couple of things. One, they're going to really help our own designers and contractors and all of that inside the city experiment with some technologies, work on things, but also serve as a very public face. They're in parks. They're in places that can continue to inspire and lead and educate. And then again, on the individual building scale, the City Planning Commission is going to take up in the next probably 6 months to a year a mandate around putting solar on every new building that's constructed. We already have a code that says you need to have a solar-ready roof, and now we did this with EV chargers. There was a code requirement for a while that you needed place and conduit and wiring for EV chargers, and now we require the EV chargers. I think we'll probably see that with the renewable energy side coming in the next year. So that's on the individual building side. The second scale is at the neighborhood or sectoral based scale, and this is a little less formed other than the existing building energy efficiency ordinance, which has transparency, benchmarking, mandatory retro commissioning, which is going to get us to some building sectors. But there's an emerging thought about how can we get buildings to be able to, in multifamily, to buy into a community solar system, to help work at the distribution station level. I see Andy and Reiko and Louis there, who from DWP, who are thinking a lot about what can we do at this neighborhood scale that really integrates with our utility. And then the third scale clearly is at the electricity provision itself and getting to 100% clean energy. And we have a process underway. It's I think one of the core things and one of the things that we're going to need to take away from the Energy Commission is what's our process to determine that. But I also think setting a date out there is important, and I think we'll see a date because the dates always happen. Ed, you've been working with a date, Architecture 2030, for a long, long time, and having those target dates are really important. Let me just say why at these 3 scales. So the first scale, at that individual building level, we need to continue to push the envelope. We need to push the envelope because of technology, but we also need to continue to push that envelope in terms of inspiring people to make systematic changes in their own homes, their own buildings that they own, their own lives, their own actions. So that's at the building scale. The second piece, and this is something that I've learned a lot in my teaching at UCLA, where we've had students year after year after year design net zero energy communities is that there is a density limit for net zero buildings. We generally are finding that the density limit is about 4 to 6 stories. You get over that and you just run out of roof space in order to put enough PV. And so we're gonna have to figure out how to have these buildings, in order to get net zero, do something off-site. And I was encouraged to hear from the Newhall Land folks that you've also figured that out and are gonna have to go and buy in somewhere else off-site to do that. And then the third reason to work at these multiple scales is what you mentioned about the ratepayer impact. If we just rely on the specific building, only those with resources will be able to pay for it. And as people defect from the grid, the only people who will be left to pay for maintaining that grid will be people with fewer resources. And that's a real equity challenge. It's not just an equity challenge to get people to do stuff in their own buildings, but at the utility scale, we really need to make sure that we keep enough people bought into the grid so that we can all participate in maintaining that thing that we need. So I think that's the reason that we're working at all scales.
Yeah, good job, good answer. Just 10 seconds on water.
Yeah, so I think the issue with water is that we, as people noted, we spend a lot of money treating, moving, dealing with water. The less we can use, the more conservation we can do, will mean that we are spending less electricity statewide in moving water. But then the more we produce locally, and that's why we have a big, aggressive local water development strategy to try to reduce our imports of purchased water by 50% over the next 10 years, is going to drive, mostly, I think, from a GHG perspective, really be a big contribution to the state's goals.
Yeah, terrific. So Ryan, last but not least, good answer. Thank you. That's great. We're suffering with a time shortage here. So anyway, but Ryan, you have been in the smart building space for a long time. You've worked on a ton of projects. You've had a bunch of experience working on water. Could you just, do you think commercial buildings can get to net zero water too? And is there a place where kind of a net zero water goal and a net zero energy goal go together in a kind of efficient and pragmatic way?
Yeah, let me grab these slides here. Yeah, I mean, thus far we've talked about net zero energy, but we haven't really talked about water. So I'd like to jump into water.
Good. After a drink.
So we work on a variety of projects, big and small, hotels, everything else, but looking at warehouse distribution facilities, we looked at how to utilize that. That's where most of the solar is going up, large in-basin solar. Industrial buildings are about 15% of the building stock in the United States. So we took a 300,000 square foot warehouse building and tried to run all the numbers on energy efficiency and then apply solar. The other part that we haven't really talked much about is atmospheric water generation. Show of hands, anybody ever hear of this? Wow, a lot more than I would think. So atmospheric water generation, it makes water out of the air. So it condenses it, purifies it, 3 ultraviolet lights, 9 filters, 0.001 microns, highly purified water that you can produce on site. Yes, it doesn't really work in the desert, but even Phoenix and Vegas, it can work in the mornings. So what we did was we looked at an industrial building. We have about 90% of the roof areas open and available outside of skylights and other equipment. If we were to put solar on that roof to run that whole building, it would take up that first section of yellow. The next section in blue is how much solar would be required to run the water for that whole building in site. The remaining area can be used for feed-in tariff, which is a great option. So here we can take 15% of the building's off-grid water and energy and have left over for some feed-in tariff. Oh, the slides got mixed up on this situation. Oh well. So net zero energy and water, if you're just taking those buildings 15% off grid, if you use PACE financing, you put 0 down. Tax credit, annual energy and water offset, your PACE budget, so you're net positive in year 1 with 0 down, and 10-year benefit over $1 million. You cannot currently use PACE financing for FIT, but hopefully we can try and change that sometime soon.
Yeah.
But if you were to use PACE financing for FIT, and you did the whole building, you'd be getting money back for your feed-in tariff at 15 cents, and you'd be net zero energy. So now we'd take maybe 10, 15% of homes. So we could probably get 25, 30% of all buildings today with financing available today and systems available today to net zero energy and net zero water for the 15% of the buildings and make a lot of money. So all these systems are in place and available today. So
Great.
I do think we can get towards net zero energy, net zero water. And we're taking our headquarters building to net zero energy, net zero water here in LA. So we'll be working with Ted on some of the policies and other people because that's a little bit hard to do, but we are in that process of LEED Platinum and net zero energy and net zero water on a project in LA.
Yeah, great. So guys, if you wanted to leave us with one sentence on what is the most important thing we need to do to make sure that this net zero world becomes a reality, what would you say? And literally one sentence, because we are already over. Ted?
Energy efficiency on the individual buildings, neighborhood scale in figuring out how to have our buildings and different income levels cooperate, and 100% clean energy.
Thanks.
For private sector, incentives. The incentives have to be there. That's what's been driving our energy efficiency programs. That's what's driven our renewable energy programs. You know, when we started the FIT effort several years ago, that was, you know, a bigger effort than we've ever undertaken to expand incentives for renewables. So I think that's what has to continue, is that we have to continue incentives for renewables, create and continue incentives for storage, and that will lead to implementation on a greater scale.
Awesome. Gina?
I think that this concept has to go beyond buildings. It has to go beyond, to go to communities and even at nationwide level. And I think the most challenge issue for us is to go into the next area, what we call occupant behavior. I think that will be our next biggest challenge.
We issued the 2030 targets in 2006, so we're 10 years into it. People thought getting to zero was going to be almost impossible. Every conference this year is a getting to zero, achieving zero conference. It's really has exploded, and that's only 10 years out, and we have another 13 years before we, 12, 13 years before we even we really have to get there. The one area that's lagging a bit is education, especially professional education, and we're about to be pushing that in a new and dramatic way.
Fantastic. Andrew?
That's great. I would point out, you know, that energy efficiency is still #1 in the state, and it actually, over the last 40 years, has produced more energy benefits, more carbon benefits, more consumption reduction benefits than all the other technologies combined. And so I think we need to appreciate that and push that forward. We need to think of our energy systems as really an ecosystem, an organism, really. And so integration is the word I would leave everyone with. We have technologies today. We can do this today. We need to make sure that all of the pieces of the orchestra are playing as a one whole that sounds nice and has a reliability. And so that takes a lot of work to knit things together and a lot of detailed work. But that integration of all the pieces is the key, from my perspective, policy takeaway that we're working on feverishly, and it's going to enable the marketplace to do what needs to be done.
Thanks. Ryan?
Yeah, while we work in sustainability and sell and lease atmospheric water generators, one thing we don't talk about a lot is our choices of consumption be it animal products, clothes, coffee. I mean, everything takes energy to produce, ship, distribute, use, throw away. So I think being conscious of our purchases.
Yeah, great. So we're in the right place to be having this conversation. Please hold these guys accountable, the private sector, the city, the state, and let's lead from here and make this happen. It'd be great. Thanks to the panel.
I am tripping. Everybody doing okay? Great, great. Well, now you've just heard again one of the emphases on what many have termed the low-hanging fruit in energy efficiency, and of course the talk of 100% clean energy. And we have now coming to speak to us from our Senate President Pro Tem of California. He's going to be introduced to us by Lupita Sanchez Cornejo, Director of External Affairs for AT&T.
Thank you, Ivan. Good morning. My name is Lupita Sanchez Cornejo with AT&T. I am pleased to be here today to represent AT&T as a proud event host for the 2017 Sustainability Summit. Today, I have the distinct honor to introduce our Senate President Pro Tem, Kevin De Leon. Before I ask the Senator to take the stage, I'd like to spend a brief moment sharing with you why we are here today and why we think it's so important for AT&T to participate in today's summit. The theme of this year's summit is California Business for Cleaner, Greener Communities. We are all here today to do our part to create those cleaner and greener communities. Cleaner and greener is something AT&T is actively working hard to achieve. We are helping to make cities cleaner, safer, and stronger by providing connectivity and technology solutions that can help lead to environmental, social, and economic benefits. We're helping communities solve problems by connecting things like utility meters, street lights, and water pipes to more environmentally friendly. Adding connectivity to these physical properties can transform how cities serve their residents, use energy, and preserve natural resources. But you can't just talk the talk. You've got to walk the walk. That's why we have an incentive program that provides employees thousands of dollars of discounts if they purchase an electric vehicle. That's why we have programs that ensure that intelligent lighting, water, parking, energy grid, and public transport management solutions are available to enable cities to save money, preserve natural resources, and build better relationships with their citizens. We are working with communities across California to create smarter cities so they can efficiently deliver transportation services, clean water,